In more recent years, recent meaning the last 30 years of playing with Rush, the drum solo has developed into a fairly consistent part of a performance and a main part of the show, for me anyway. And it's something I always make it a matter of principle to change every tour. When we're setting up at the beginning of the tour, I just want it to be a new presentation. And sometimes I'm even kind of reluctant about that change. I'll listen to my solo from the previous tour and think, well, I'm not really finished with that structure. And I'm still quite happy to build on that and use it from night to night as my own kind of laboratory for developing designs and also as a presentation for the audience. But again, as a matter of principle, I just force myself to do it and to make it new. And the reason for having a structure, too, is because it's a performance in front of an audience. I want a certain level of consistency, and just as the band does in our whole performance, it's an element of what I want a Rush show always to be: consistently good. And so within that structure, there'll be transitions that I have arranged to be fixed, but the elements within them will vary, and the way that I play them can vary greatly from night to night. But it's important to me that it's a composition, and as a piece of music, it has linked movements and an arrangement and an architecture. And again, like a piece of music, to me, in the interior design of it, there are themes and dynamics, textures, melody, humor, and tension and release. That's such an important part of music in general. Always. It's a performance to me for the audience. And as I described before, of growing up and being in the audience and watching drummers play, learning that aspect of what it's like to experience a drum solo from the other side. And the visual aspect, too, is a big part of it, as it is for a Rush concert in general. And there's lighting involved and rear screen projections and other people who are performing even as I am. The lighting director following me, the video director for the images that appear on the rear screen, the cameraman shooting it, and the film director who has made the accompanying video montage that appears behind me. And there's a lot going on, and it all starts with, let's talk about the drums. Because it was our 30th anniversary tour, I really wanted to do something special just in the drum set alone. And where I live now in California, I'm just a short drive from the drum workshop factory, so I was able to visit regularly and look at different prototypes that we were developing with John Good and the painter Louis and their transfer designer Javier. And they presented different ideas, and we worked on them. And basically, we came up with a design that combined elements from logos from Rush albums over the years, and a basic black with the red pinstripe, in fact, is a reflection of the previous red sparkle drums I had in the Test for Echo and Vapor Trails tours, which also, of course, reflects my very first red sparkle Stewarts that I described earlier. And the graphic design in the centers of the shells is kind of modeled after Keith Moon's Pictures of Lily set from the 60s. That was my dream drums when I was a teenager, and it was very much a mode that I wanted to reflect in these. It was my dream set of drums. So I reflected what was my dream set of drums as a teenager, too. And when I was walking around the drum workshop factory, I happened to see some shells hanging in the paint shop with a sparkly mirror finish. I said, ooh, I'll have that. So we used that in the middle of the graphic design as well. And the cymbals, a similar thing really happened. I was working with Sabian on developing the Paragon line, and with Mark Love at the factory, their alchemist. And between us, we developed some original approaches to the cymbals. Mark's idea for the lathing and the grooving and the hand hammering that all contributed to a sound of the ride cymbal and the crashes and the effect cymbals that reflected the voice that I wanted to have cymbal-wise. Another element, apart from the acoustic drums, too, was the electronics. And I've been using, since about 1983, I started with the Simmons Electronics drums. And we were working then on the songwriting for our Grace Under Pressure album. And before recording that, we went to Radio City Music Hall and just did 5 shows just as a kind of warm-up before we went into the studio. And we were playing some of the songs in which I was using the electronic drums. Now, I hadn't wanted to replace acoustic drums with electronics, so in trying to think of how not to compromise what I had, but to add a whole new element, I came up with the idea of having a satellite kit, I called it really, which was the electronic drums would be behind me and would be a separate setup that I would stand up, turn around, and play. But in the context of those shows, I had to stand up, turn around, and play facing the back of the stage. So I had to come up with some idea to resolve that. So before the tour came up, we thought about it and decided, okay, well, what we needed was something that would allow me to turn around and play and still face the audience. So we developed the rotating riser. Just like that. So in the initial Simmons setup, I still stayed with using a small acoustic bass drum, in fact an 18-inch acoustic bass drum, which was also a reflection back to my very first Red Sparkle drums. And I used a real snare and cymbals at that time and just added in the Simmons pads. And as sampling and MIDI and electronic drums in general developed as I did and progressed and made so much more possible and gave me so many more ideas, I expanded, became a greater part of the show and our music, and certainly a greater part of my solo. So on this, just before Vapor Trails, really, during the pre-production and songwriting of that, I started working with the V drums and eventually took the full step and introduced electronic bass drum, hi-hat, cymbals, snare drum, everything.